Hey, what's up everybody? Too Tall Toby here, and in today's Onshape step-by-step tutorial, we are going to take a look at the process of building this assembly of the screwdriver. Now, this assembly was featured in a tutorial that we posted a few months ago, the desktop organizer using 3D models from Onshape and 3D printing, and the physical parts exist in the real world. So this screwdriver is actually my favorite screwdriver of all time. It is an amazing screwdriver, and you can see that I've got it modeled here on screen. And one of the questions that we got a lot in that 3D printable desktop organizer video was, how do you go about modeling these physical parts? And the method that I personally find a lot of success from is taking photographs of the real world parts and then using those photographs to help guide your design. So for example, if we look at the handle of this project here and we roll back to earlier in the tree, we can see here that there's actually a photograph of the physical part, and that I was able to use that photograph of the physical part to design this handle in Onshape. And this is what we're going to be going over today. I'm going to show you the best practices, the best steps, and some tips and tricks on how to take photographs of your parts. And then I'm going to show you how to bring those photographs into Onshape so that you can actually design your models in Onshape based on the geometry from those photographs. So you can see here that I was able to design the plastic handle part, that I was able to design this metal sleeve here, and then I finished off by designing that rubber grip that goes around the outside of that screwdriver handle. And this is going to be the part studio that we're going to build today in this tutorial. And then once I'm done filming this tutorial, what we're going to do is I'm going to model the rest of the parts offline, and I'll include that as a public document so that you can search for and find that public document. And that way you could go through and take a look at some of the other parts in this assembly. Now, this version of the assembly is also in the public space. So if you go into Onshape and you search the public space for 2025 Toby screwdriver assembly, you'll find this version, which has all of these different parts. It's got the sub-assemblies, the assembly, and you'll also notice down here that when we work with photos, those photos get included in the project as well. So if you're interested in looking at this version of the project, you can absolutely do that right now. But if you'd like to see what happens when we start at the beginning and work our way through taking photographs, preparing those photographs, using those photographs in Onshape, well, you are in the right place. So be sure to hit the like button on this video. Be sure to let me know down below in the comments if you have any questions or if you learn anything cool that you really like about this tutorial. And let's get into it with our first step, which is to start taking photos of our physical parts. So before we actually get into Onshape and start modeling, we got to take some photos of our physical parts. And there's going to be some tools that you're going to want to have handy when you're getting ready to take these photos. First of all, you're going to want to have a good source of light. This light here is a camping light, a light that I take with me when we go camping. And this is a great source of light. What you're trying to do is you're trying to eliminate shadows. You want to try to avoid getting any shadows on your photographs. So I'm going to set this up over here. There we go. The next thing that's going to be really handy is going to be to have a backdrop for your photos. So a simple sheet of white paper works great. It's also good if you have something that's not white in case you are taking photographs of white parts. So we'll drop this over here. There we go. We got a nice backdrop. Then, of course, you're going to need the physical parts. So in this case, we've got the screwdriver, and we're going to be focusing today on the handle. So we've got the handle here for the screwdriver. This is actually 3 parts in 1 part studio. So we've got the plastic yellow component, we've got the rubber grippy component, and then there's a metal sleeve going down the middle. So we're going to be taking some photos of that. But you'll notice that we also have some other components here that are part of this project, and we want to make sure that we are able to work with these components. I'm laughing because I saw in the background that the gripper here rolled away, and so that actually brings me on to the next tool that I think that we should have, which is, for me, I use one of these. It's a file, just like a little file for 3D printing, something small that you can use to stop round parts from rolling away. Something small that you can use to stop round parts from rolling away. So you'll notice here, if I put this kind of behind the object, it stops that object from rolling away, and that's another really good thing to have. So something small that you can put in there. It's not going to really affect your photos too much. That's going to stop round parts from rolling away. That's also very handy. I think in the case of this project, I'd probably use that more with this shape here. This, you can see, is a very shiny, almost a white component. So this would be a component that I would probably use the orange backdrop for. And I want to get this to a very specific orientation. So having a part like this is going to help me get to that orientation information and stop the part from rolling around so I can get kind of the perfect photograph. So how do we take our photos? Well, we're going to need some kind of a camera to take our photos. And I think that most people have a smartphone that probably has a camera that is more than adequate for this task. So you can see here, I'm going to be using my smartphone. And when you go to take these photos, the thing that you want to be careful of is not getting too close. You don't want to be too close to the object that you're trying to photograph. So if I'm way down here like this, right on top of the object, I'm going to run into some problems. I'm going to end up getting a little bit of distortion due to perspective. And that's what you want to avoid. So instead, what I try to do is I try to be about, 1 to 2 feet away from the object, further if you can, but about 1 to 2 feet away from the object is usually pretty good. You want to still get nice sharp edges from your models so that when you bring that image into Onshape, you can trace around the image. However, you don't want to be too close to the point where you're going to end up getting a problem with perspective. Now, sometimes what I have to do is I have to take a photo on this end of the model, and then I have to take another photo on this end of the model, and then I kind of stitch them together in post-processing so that I can really capture the details of the different ends of the model. But you want to do your best not to end up with a perspective distortion, so don't get too close to your objects. Finally, when you're taking the photos, you want to take a lot of photos and you want to make sure that you are as square as possible. So you don't want the phone to be angled this way or this way. You also, if possible, you want the object to be exactly horizontal or exactly vertical. That's another pro tip. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually correct that in post-processing, but the closer you get to vertical or horizontal, the better you will be. So use the grid lines on your phone if your camera has grid lines in the viewfinder, and then just start snapping off photos. Usually I would stand up and I would be looking down in the viewfinder, but here you can see I'm just going to take a bunch of pictures here, and we're going to see if we can get one that's pretty close to what we want from this project. And now we're going to repeat that process, this time looking down in. You can see that this has like kind of a flower pattern as we're looking in here from the end of the part. And so we're going to repeat this process kind of looking down in. And this is another tool that can be very helpful, some type of a white object that you can use to prop up your components so that you can take an image from a different direction. Now, what you're using here is really based on what you have available. Maybe you've got a clamp, maybe you've got a vise, whatever it is that you can use. I'm using an all white 3D printed object because my backdrop is white, and that's going to give me a good photo where I'm not going to end up seeing that component. It's not going to distract me. The other thing you want to remember is that even with the additional lighting we've got here, we're probably still going to get shadows on one side. Hopefully your parts are either symmetric or they are revolved parts. So even if you do get shadows on one side, it's not the end of the world, but you want to maybe take some time and maybe rotate the part, or you could maybe rotate the light. You want to try and do whatever you can to eliminate as much of the shadowing as you can, because it's going to make it much easier to trace these parts. So just to review what we went over there, some of the things that you're going to need good lighting to eliminate the shadows. You're going to need some kind of a backdrop so you can get contrast between your parts and the background. You don't want to do it on this wooden desk here. You want to have something that's a little more solid. You want to have some tools around that'll help you to orient the part. Tools like this to help you orient the part. You want a different color backdrop in case you're working with white parts or working with shiny parts. A different color backdrop will be helpful. Here I'm using like an orange paper and a white paper for my backdrop. And you want to make sure that when you take your photos, you're using a high quality image setting on your camera, and that your phone is about 1 to 2 feet away from your object or more to avoid perspective. And finally, you want to make sure that your phone is square. Okay, you want to make sure it's nice and plumb, and you want to make sure that, if possible, the part is vertical or horizontal in the viewfinder. So I'm going to take some pictures of this component. I'm going to take some pictures of this component as well. Okay, we're going to take some pictures of all the components, and then once we have all those pictures taken, we're going to take a look at the raw photos, and then we're going to try to figure out which ones look the best, and we're going to do that in the next video. All right, so now that we've got those photos taken, we're ready to jump into Onshape, right? Well, not quite yet. First of all, we have to look at our library of photos and figure out which ones are good. And second, we have to crop and pre-process some of those photos so that they can drop into Onshape. So let's talk about that first step. We're going to look at our directory of all the photos that we took, and we're going to try to figure out which ones are good photos. And then what I usually do is I create a second directory here. In this case, it's actually called Good Photos. Good name for that directory. And we're going to find find the ones that are good, and we're going to add them to this directory. So if we're looking here at all the raw photos, what exactly is it that we are looking for? Well, there's a couple of things that we're looking for. We're looking to see if the edges are nice and crisp and clear, because what we're going to do is we're going to trace these edges in Onshape. So I think that in this image, the edges are nice and crisp and clear, but there is something that concerns me. It looks like this face here is kind of leaning back, and this face here is kind of leaning back. And what that tells me is when I took the picture, I was on a slight angle. So I don't think this one's going to be a good picture. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the next image here. So this one kind of having the same issue there. Let's go on to the next picture here. Oh, oops, sorry, that's the same picture. Here we go. This one kind of having the same issue right there. And this one, let's see, that one looks better. That one I think is a winner. So what we're looking for here is we're looking for nice, crisp, clean, sharp edges here. And we're looking for this face here to not have that kind of leaning back look to it. Because when we bring this into Onshape, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tracing over this shape here. We're going to be using sketch mode to trace this. We might not even add dimensions. We might just trace this real quickly just so that we have a representation of this part. So we really want to make sure that those edges are nice and crisp and sharp. And I think this one looks pretty good. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to add it into the folder of good images. And so if we move on here, we can see here we're looking at this part. Let's see, how's this part look? Oh, that looks pretty sharp. I like that. That one I think looks great. What is it that I'm trying to capture from this part? I'm trying to capture this curve here. Can see how it's kind of hard to see because it reflects off the background, but this curve here, and I'm trying to capture this shape here. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to capture from the photo. That's why I took the photo of this part. You know, the rest of it I can just measure with a caliper. I can measure this diameter. I can measure this diameter with a caliper. Nice and easy. The hex cuts that are in the ends, I can just measure that with a caliper. But it's those curves that are going to be really beneficial to have a photo. So I think I'm going to add that one to my good photos library as well. Here we can see we're looking at one of the bits. Oh, look at that. That looks pretty good. We're looking dead on, looking right down at the end of that bit. That one looks good. If we go to the next one here, this one doesn't look as good. You can see how it's like, it's more off center. Okay. I'll show you kind of the two so you can compare them. That one I think looks really good. Looking right down on the center. This one, not so much. Okay, so those are the types of things that you're looking for as you're analyzing these photos. If we look at a photo here of this bit from the side, again, what is it that we're hoping to use from this photo? We're hoping to capture this curvature here. We're hoping to capture maybe this curvature across the top here. And I think that we can do those with this photo, so I think that's a good photo. We're looking for nice, crisp lines from these photos. And then finally, this one here, this is where we're looking in from the end of the part. And what we're hoping to capture is maybe this shape here, this curve here. So we know what size circle to use when we do our cut extrude. So that one looks pretty good. Ooh, that one looks even better. That's like dead on centered inside of that circle. And that one, not so much. Okay, see how this ended up shifting over in this direction? I'll show you again the kind of before and after. This one, good. Right down the center, looking right down through that hole. This one shifted over. You can also kind of see it if you look in here at the hole. You can see how that hole is not centered, but here in this one, that's pretty much as good as it's going to get from a photo. And remember, we are working with photos here. We're not doing plus or minus, 0.5 microns or anything like that. We're doing probably closer to plus or minus 0.5 millimeters. If you can get 0.5 millimeter tolerance, you're probably doing pretty good if you're working with photos. So just keep that in mind as well. And, we look through these photos. Okay, we got a final photo here. It's kind of like a reference of the screwdriver. And then here again, we're looking at this bit. And in the case of this one, I think what we're trying to capture here is this curve of the flathead. And I think that's really good. I think we did a really good job of capturing that in this image. I think that's going to work out good when we go to draw up that bit. And certainly we don't need to draw up that bit, but if anybody looks at a bit like this, or if they look at this Phillips head, looks like this Phillips is a little bit off center. The flathead is perfect, but the Phillips is a little off center. Here you can see I'm using a tool to align that part to get the perfect view, but it's not really a good view of this end. Well, what we did was we took photos of this part from two different angles. So this one for the flathead, and this one looking down on the top, and then this one for the Phillips. So here now you can see I'm looking dead on at this thing, and I'm going to be able to capture this shape. And a lot of times when these are objects we've seen for a long time, all our lives, we've seen these Phillips bits, it's just really helpful to be able to use a photo to kind of get your model to match up. So when somebody looks at it, they say, yep, that's a Phillips, as opposed to saying, something doesn't look right about that. So a lot of times that's why we use photos also. So now that we've gone through, we've identified which photos are good, we can take those photos and we can add them to our library of good photos. And this is what we're left with. We're left with this good photo of the sleeve, this good photo of the bit, this good photo of the bit, this good photo of the entire screwdriver, this good photo looking in from the end, and this good photo here looking down on the top of that handle. And we're going to add those photos to the Onshape project. But before we do, we need to do a little bit of cropping, a little bit of pre-processing to get these photos ready to be added into Onshape, and that's what we're going to do in the next video. So now we've looked through our whole library of photos, our bundle of photos, our package of photos, and we've identified the ones that look good, the ones that are going to actually be good photos. But we're not quite ready to use these photos in Onshape yet, because whenever you're working with photos in Onshape, there's a little pro move, a little trick that you can do when you're pre-processing those photos. And that trick is that you can anchor the photo to the upper left corner before you bring it into Onshape. And what that means is that we need to crop the photo. And if we do this, if we crop the photo so that it's anchored in the upper left corner, and if we also do one other step, which is to orient the photo so that it is truly vertical, then the only thing we need to do when we bring it into Onshape is just stretch it out so that the width of the photo matches the width of the physical part. And how do we know what the width of the physical part is? We measure it. So we just measure the physical part, drop in a layout sketch here, and then we use that layout sketch to help us as we are sizing the photo. So there's two things that you want to do when you're pre-processing your photos. First of all, you want to anchor the photo to the upper left corner. And second, you want to make sure that the photo is oriented truly vertical. Now, in order for you to know what's considered truly vertical as opposed to horizontal, you have to kind of have a game plan for the project. And in the case of this project, my game plan is that if I look down from the top at this screwdriver, it's going to be oriented like this. It's going to be oriented like this, looking down from the top. So that's going to help me, because now as I'm going through and I'm setting up all my photos and pre-processing my photos, I know to orient them all the same way so that as I'm building them in Onshape, they're all oriented the correct way. And also when I go to assemble my components, it'll make things a little bit easier. So let's get into it here. We're going to go back to our folder of good photos, and we're going to take our good photo of the handle looking down from the top. Here's what that handle looks like looking down from the top. And we're going to open that into a photo editor program. Now, for today's example, I'm using a totally free program. It's called paint.net. I've been using this program for a long time. It's a really simple program, but what I like about it is that it utilizes layers. This is what's going to be important for this next step. So you might use a different program. That's totally fine. Use whatever you want. But in my case, I'm going to be using this program, paint.net, and I'm going to bring in this handle from top. And now we have two goals. Our first goal is to get this part to be oriented vertical. Our second goal is to anchor in the upper left corner of the photograph. So for the first goal, what we'll do is we'll start out here by just rotating the entire image. Image, rotate 90 degrees clockwise. All right, that's almost vertical. We're pretty close there. Let's do a little bit of a crop here. So I'm just going to put a window around the entire handle here, and then I'm going to use the command image crop to selection. So this is if you are using paint.net, then you would use this tool here to do that selection. And then once you use that tool to do that selection, you can do image crop to selection. And now I'm going to go over here into my layers tool, and I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to add a new layer here. And for that new layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line. So here's the line tool. And this line is going to be relatively narrow as far as width. I'm using a brush size of 2. And I'm going to choose a color here from this color palette that will really stand out compared to my photo. So I'm going to use a magenta color here. And then when I go to sketch the line, I'm going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard. Shift. So you see I'm making a vertical line there, and by holding Shift, it forces that line to be vertical. It really forces it into like 15-degree increments, but in this case, it's kind of forcing that line to be vertical. Now I'm going to hit Escape, and I'm going to click over here on my layers. I'm going to click back to the layer that has the photo on it, and then I'm going to press Control A, just select all, and then M, which is move. And what that lets me do is lets me come over here to the edge of this image and rotate the image. So I'm rotating the image here to get the image vertical relative to those lines. Now, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly vertical, but the closer you get it, the easier your job is going to be when you go to bring this into Onshape. So now that I've got that thing vertical, I'm going to move it over here a little bit and just double check my work. And I think that looks pretty darn good. That's good enough for me. It's basically staying parallel to this line the entire duration of the part. And so now that I've got that thing vertical, I can go back to layer 2. I can delete layer 2, and then I'm going to go back to that selection tool, rectangle select, and I'm going to choose to create a rectangle here to crop this thing. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to anchor in that upper left corner. So I'm creating this crop here like so, and then I'm going to say image crop to selection. Now you'll notice that what's happening on the right here and what's happening down at the bottom doesn't matter as much, but what's happening up here in the upper left is very important. In this case, I've got a tiny little gap here to the max diameter. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that tiny little gap. And I've got maybe a tiny little gap up top here, but I'm pretty darn close in both directions. And that is what I'm hoping to accomplish from this step. So now that I've cropped that image, I'm going to go to the command File, Save As, and I'm going to save this into a new folder that I created called Cropped Photos. And I'm going to call this one Cropped Handle from Top. I'm going to say Save and OK. And now we are ready to bring this image into Onshape, and that way we can start tracing the components for the handle around this image. Now, before we jump into Onshape, I just want to show you what some of those other cropped photos look like. So we've got this one here. This one is the cropped image of the flathead bit. Okay, what am I going to trace here? I'm going to trace this shape. Maybe I'll trace this shape as well. I've got the cropped image of that same bit looking in from the front. I've got the cropped image of the handle from the full screwdriver, excuse me, just as a reference. I've got the cropped image of the handle looking in from the end. That way we can gather this radius here when we go to create that pattern for that cut. I've got the cropped image that we just created together. I've got the cropped image of the Phillips bit. So this one I'm focusing more down here on this end. So I can kind of capture these angles here and capture this shape for the cut revolve. And I've got the cropped image of the Torx bit looking in from the end and the cropped image of the Torx bit looking down from the top. Finally, I've got the cropped image here of that central sleeve. This one is a little bit tricky. What's happening here is that we are reflecting the orange, but the edge of the part is actually over here. Okay, so again, we're cropping that and anchoring it in there on that upper left corner. So those are our cropped images, and you can expect to see them in the new Onshape project. If you search for the 2026 Toby screwdriver project, you'll be able to see all those images, and that way you can use them in your own project, or you can practice drawing to these cropped images. But now what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to start modeling up that handle using the two images, the cropped image looking down from the top and the cropped image looking in from the end. All right, so now that we've got those images pre-processed and ready to go into Onshape, let's close this current project. Again, this project is in the public space, so you can search for this text string here if you want to open up the 2025 version. But let's close this project and let's create a new document here, and we're going to call this 2026 Toby screwdriver, and we're going to put this into the public space so you can search for this one as well. And now we're going to start out here by creating a new part studio or working with the existing part studio here. I'm going to rename this part studio. That's the first thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to rename this, and I'll call this one, I'll just call this handle. It's going to be 3 parts in the part studio, so I'll just call it handle. And now we're going to go to our top plane, and we're going to begin a new sketch on the top plane. Now, whenever you're working with photos in Onshape, a really good step to do first is to create a layout sketch that you're going to use to size the photo, but that you're also going to use to define the key locations on your project. So let's take a look at what that looks like here. Top plane, S key, begin a sketch, N, to get normal to, and then S key rectangle, and I'm just going to create a rectangle here a little bit below the origin. In this project, the origin is going to be at the very top of the handle. So I'm going to create a shape that looks like this, and it's going to come down and over, and that's going to be the main shape of the handle. So I'm going to create a rectangle here that's going to start a little bit below the origin, and then I'm going to take some physical measurements off the handle. So let me separate the handle from the rest of the assembly, and what I'm going to measure here is going to be the overall diameter of the handle at the widest point, which the widest point is this kind of ring down here. There's a little ring here. So I'm going to take a measurement of the handle at that widest point, because that is part of my image. That looks to be about 31.3 millimeters in diameter, 31.4 maybe in diameter. And then I'm going to take the length of the handle here. And the handle looks to have a length of about 107.6 millimeters. So 107.6 and it's like about 31.5. So 31.5, 107.6. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit escape, and I'm just going to take this rectangle and give it a midpoint relationship here to the origin. So there we go. Now that rectangle is nice and fully defined, fully constrained. Now, what I also like to do is I like to take some other key measurements off of this model. So for example, the diameter of this shape here, it's kind of like a button shape at the top of the model. That diameter is about 18.6 millimeters, 18.7 millimeters. And then the height of that is about 4 millimeters. So I'll create another rectangle here, like so. We'll make that 18.7 by 4, and then we'll take that rectangle and we'll drop that directly on the origin. So Shift M is a shortcut for midpoint. So now I know about what size that button should be for the photo, but I also know what size the button should be when I start actually creating my sketches for the revolve. Now, another key dimension that we can easily measure on this thing is going to be the dimension from the bottom of the part to where this rubber handle begins. So we'll just create this dimension here. We'll try to capture this dimension. Looks like about 28.5 millimeters to that location. So I'll create a line here that comes across, and then I'll give that line a dimension, and that dimension is going to be about 28.5 millimeters. And so now I've got these key locations on the layout sketch, and I'm going to use those key locations not only to help me define the size of the image, but they're also going to help me define the actual shape when I go to actually start sketching and modeling in Onshape. So I'm going to hit the check mark there, and I'm going to rename that sketch, and that's going to be called Layout for Handle. And then the other thing that I do with this layout sketch for the handle is I take it and I right mouse button and I go down here to Edit Sketch Appearance. Edit Sketch Appearance. I know it's getting a little bit covered by the, let me see if I move this up a little bit here. There we go. Edit Sketch Appearance. And so if I say Edit Sketch Appearance, then I can change that to a different color. And what I want to do is I want to change this to a color that's really going to pop even when I've got that photo added in Onshape. So I'm going to make that a red color here like so, and then I'll hit the green check mark. Now that I've got that layout sketch created, now I'm ready to start bringing in the geometry for the photo. So the way that we can do that is we could start a new sketch. I like to start a new sketch rather than just adding it in here in the layout sketch. So I'm going to go top plane, S key, begin a sketch. And then usually I just go up here and I search. I can never remember where it is. Okay, spoiler, it's in here, it's in this menu, but I can never remember where it is. So I like to go up here and search, and then I just type in image. So first you get into sketch mode, and then you search for your commands and you type in image. And I'm going to say insert image. And then this image is going to be added to the current document, the 2026 Toby screwdriver. And I'm going to say import. And then the image that I'm going to bring in here is going to be the handle from top, but it's going to come from my cropped photos library here. So I'm going to go in here to my cropped photos. And then once I get into my cropped photos here, I'm going to grab this cropped handle from top. And I'm going to say open. And now it says select an imported image. Well, right now I'm uploading that image. Okay, look, it's already done uploading. So it's been uploaded. And so I'm going to click on that image from this list over here. And then Onshape says draw an image rectangle. Well, the cool thing is because I anchored the image to the upper left corner, and because I created this layout sketch, which also has an anchor up here in the upper left corner, I can just draw this rectangle starting at this corner. So I can left click here on this corner, make that coincident relationship, and then I can bring in this image, and all I have to do with this image is just make sure that I get the width to be the correct width. And so here we go. Let's give it a try, see if we can get that width to be pretty close. There we go. Drop in that image, and let's see what we got here. Looks like that width is almost spot on there. It looks like that 28.5 was a pretty good dimension. It looks like I did a pretty good job with this photo. Of course, you can left click and drag on the photo if you want to make it a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, resize it any further. But I got to say, this is looking pretty darn good here. Pretty darn good here. I think I'm pretty happy with how this image is looking. And that's really the power of pre-processing those images. If you pre-process those images, you're going to have a lot more experiences like this. If you don't pre-process the image, you're going to really struggle to get the image scaled, to get the image to be the correct size and get it into the correct location. So make sure that you take that pro tip and get that image pre-processed so that you can drop it in and get it to be the right size. So I think this is looking pretty good. I think we're ready to move on here. So I'm going to hit the green check mark, and then I'm going to rename that image of handle from top. Image of handle from top. There we go. And so now let's create our first sketch. I think I'm going to do this in 3 different parts within this part studio. I'm going to do the yellow plastic part first. So let's start a new sketch here. We'll go to the top plane, S key, begin a sketch, and let's start creating the geometry for that plastic handle. Well, what's nice is that we don't really have to add in any dimensions or anything. We can just kind of use the photo as our guide. So I'll draw in a short line here, and then I'll draw in an arc like so, and just kind of try to match up with the existing geometry. I can hit escape there. I can take that arc and make it tangent here to this top line, make that tangent. That way I'll get a nice smooth dome shape on the top of that button. If I need to, I can move this up a little bit, move it down a little bit. I kind of don't want to pick up on the midpoint relationship there. That's the one thing I'm trying to avoid. All right, so that gives me kind of that shape. And then from there, I can kind of continue that line down. So I've got that short little line there. I'll just click on the end point of that line, and I'm just going to continue that line down. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bring this line all the way down to where the rubber handle starts. So where that 28.5 line is, I'm not only using that to help orient my image, but I'm also going to use that to help define the geometry of this sketch that I'm tracing over the image. Because now I can just come over with another line over to here, like so. And then I can create an arc here. So we'll go to our 3-point arc that kind of matches up with this shape. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now, to create these little grooves here, you know, it's up to you how detailed you want to get with these grooves. I think what I would probably do is I would probably make a line out here that is a construction line that's going to represent the peak of those grooves. And then I would maybe create another line here that's going to be on the inside that's going to represent the depth of those grooves. So maybe something like this, again, make it construction, maybe create something like this. And that way, when I go to create these grooves, I can make sure that they're all at the same height. Now, we could take it a step further and we could make sure that they're also all parallel. Like I could kind of wake up that line there and then try to make this one parallel to that line. And I could do the same thing here with this one, make it parallel to that line, and get to this third one, make it parallel to that first line, and make this one here parallel to that line as well. And that certainly will work as well. You know, we could get in there and we could add in some dimensions for the angle. So, you know, just looking at this thing, we could say, I think it looks like about the distance between here is about, you know, 1.25 millimeters, and maybe the angle between those is, you know, is whatever it is. Let's say it's like 55 degrees here, and maybe we'll make this one 55 degrees as well so that they're uniform. You know, the point is that it's up to you how detailed you want to get, but by having that image, you can really streamline this process and still come up with some really nice results. So I think that for this final element of this, it looks like maybe... Honestly, it just looks like it transitions right into that arc. So I think I'm just going to follow suit here and just transition right into that arc and kind of finish this thing off. So we'll go back to our 3-point arc here. We'll finish this arc off down to here. You know, maybe a dimension like this, it's at the very bottom, that's easy to measure. Maybe that's something that I would consider including in this design. So I could go to this bottom line here, and I can, you know, create another vertical line here. This vertical line I can then make for construction, and then I can add in a dimension that goes, whoops, take that line, make it for construction. There we go. And then I could add in a dimension here that goes from this point to that construction line, and I can cross over and then add in that dimension. It's really easy to measure, and it's just going to kind of make sure that everything downstream from this lines up. So we can take that measurement off the physical part. That dimension looks to me to be about... looks like about 22.4 millimeters. So maybe a little bit larger than what we're seeing here in the image, 22.4 0.4. Maybe I'll just make it 22 even. Yeah, pretty close to what we had there in the image, actually. So that looks like a pretty good result there from that sketch. All I need to do now is just close off this sketch. So come over to this point here and then come up with a final line here to close off this sketch, and we're going to be ready to revolve. So we bring in that final line there like so, and features revolve, or click up here on revolve. We pick what our revolve axis is. I'll just pick the center line that I used for that double dimension. Hit the check mark, and that is how you go from an image to a sketch and then turn that sketch into a feature. You use the image, you use the layout geometry, but you use the image really to kind of capture some key elements like these curves, like these grooves here, like this curve down at the bottom. But you still rely on your engineering prowess. You still rely on using your caliper, measuring the physical part, and using that layout sketch to help drive that geometry. The sketch is really just a reference to kind of help you with some of the more difficult to measure curvature of that model. So now that we've got that shape in place, let's move on and start talking about that kind of flower shape that's on the bottom. So if we go back to our cropped images, we can take a look at what that flower shape looks like. And it looks like it's capturing this diameter here of the handle pretty well. And we measured that at a dimension of, what do we measure that as a dimension of? Looks like we measured that. Well, actually, I should probably just look at the rectangle, the original rectangle. So we measured that at a dimension of 31.5 millimeters. So now what I could do is I could come into this face at the bottom here where I'm going to add that flower sketch, begin a sketch, orient my view, and I could drop in a rectangle here. And remember, if you hold Alt, you can turn a rectangle into a square. You can automatically add that equals. So we'll make this one 31.5 as well to kind of match up with what we had on that handle. And what that should let us do now is insert an image, and then add that image. We're going to do import. This is just like what we did earlier. Import that cropped handle from the end. Here in the guidance at the top of the screen, it says select an imported image. Here you can see it already uploaded. So I'll close that box, and then I'll click on this cropped handle from end. And then it says draw an image rectangle. So we should be able to click here and then draw this image rectangle and basically just get it pretty close to being the same size. Let's see what we end up with here. So if we move this into place here, move that image into place. Let's see here. There we go. We want that black circle from our photo to match up with the black circle of the handle, which should be here at this 31.5. Now, is that going to give us the geometry that we need for these cuts? Well, let's find out. Let's try it and find out. So I'm going to hit the check mark there, and then I'm going to go to this end surface again. Let me hide that image. I'm going to go to this end surface again, begin a sketch. I'm going to get normal 2, and then I'm going to show that image again. And now we're going to create a circle here that matches up with this end shape. So there we go. That looks pretty good, actually. Got it on the first try. I'll make it 20 millimeters for now, but what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to match up with this curvature here from the image. And I think that looks pretty good. The question is that going to be in the right location to intersect with this area down here? And I don't think it is. I feel like I must have gotten something wrong with that photo. So maybe instead of measuring that rectangle that I created, or that square that I created, I'm going to exit this sketch. Maybe instead of measuring that at the distance of the handle, maybe it would make more sense if I measured it based on the max dimension here of that flower shape. So let's say I go and I create that dimension, because it looked like they were almost overlapping. Maybe I could give myself just a little bit more, but looks like maybe 27 millimeters might be a good number there. Let's change this dimension here to 27 and see what we're dealing with. And then we'll bring the image back in and try to get that image to kind of match up with that. Okay, I think I'm falling victim here to that issue of perspective that we talked about when it came to taking those photographs. Maybe I'm getting some perspective on the diameter of the handle, and so the diameter of the handle is actually getting smaller because it's getting further away from the camera. So we'll just try and compensate for that by using our engineering intuition. And let's go back here to the sketch of the circle and now see how we need to change that in order to get it to match up with the shape of that flower. So I'm going to move this point down, and looks like maybe that diameter just gets a little bit smaller. Let's bring it down to 19 and see if that looks any better. Yeah, that looks like that'll work. That looks like that actually kind of fits right in there. I like that. So we bring that down, and it fits right in there, right on that location for that cut. So I think that looks pretty good. Maybe I would just come down a smidge further for this, just kind of looking at the model. But I think that's probably going to look pretty good, and it's probably going to do the job. So now we can take that shape and we can do an extrude, and we're going to go in this direction, and it's going to be a remove. And then we're going to have that cut through. We don't want it to cut these grooves here, obviously. So we only want it really to come to maybe about here. And I'm just eyeballing this up. Just wanted to kind of cut that groove into, well, that actually looks really good. I'm actually really happy with that. Maybe I'll bring that circle down just a little further, but overall, I'm pretty happy with how that looks as far as being recognizable. So I think that I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'm going to hide the image. So I'm going to rename this. We'll rename this one here. We'll call this one image of end cuts. And then I'm going to hide that image. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shape here, the circle. So this will be sketch, circle, cut for, I'm just going to call it flower. And that's going to be part of the yellow handle. And then what I'll do is I'll just take that sketch and maybe just move it down a smidge further. Get it a little closer to that edge. Let's see how that looks. Oh, yeah. That looks great. That's what I'm talking about. And so that is that end plastic handle cut 1. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to perform a circular pattern with that feature. So here in Onshape, we're going to go into this flyout menu here for our patterns. We're going to choose circular pattern. We're going to choose feature pattern. And the feature pattern is going to be this feature here, the end plastic handle cut 1. And then the axis of the pattern is going to be this location here. Just pick the circular edge. And we're going to have 8 instances for that pattern. Oh, yeah, that's looking great. Man, that looks... I actually think I maybe brought that circle down too far, but that certainly does look pretty good. Maybe at this point what we could do is we could double-click here on this sketch and add in a dimension. So a dimension here from the origin to this point, and that way we can kind of get this dialed in. Let's go up to like 22 millimeters and see what that looks like. Ooh, nope, that does not look good. Okay, let's go back to 21 and see what that looks like. I think it's pretty close to what we had before. Maybe I'll just stick with the 21. All right. So now that we've got that shape in place, there's one final feature in this handle, and that is that there's a hole in the end of this handle where this plastic sleeve fits. So let's get in there and create that hole. Looks like that hole has a diameter of about 17 millimeters. So we'll click here, S key, begin a sketch, N key to get normal to, S key to jump into the circle, and we'll drop in a circle here, and that circle is at a diameter of 17 millimeters. And then we can use our depth gauge here to determine what the depth of that hole is. So it looks like that's going to go down to a depth of about, looks like it's about 100 millimeters. Yeah, we'll just drop that in. Oh, nope, not 100 millimeters. Looks like I'm closer to, I don't know what I misread that before. It looks like it's closer to about 94 millimeters. So we'll do extrude. And we're going to reverse direction on that. We're going to make that 94. And that's going to be a remove and green check mark. There we go. Call this one yellow plastic handle main hole. And I think that's it. That's it for that yellow plastic handle part. So what I normally would do here is I would go to this isometric view, and then I would just go through the tree and kind of get some stuff renamed here. Shift N, I'd probably call this something like yellow plastic handle main revolve. And then we've got the end plastic handle cuts. Probably would rename that one as well. Just call it yellow plastic handle end cuts. And flower cuts. I like that, flower cuts. And flower cut 1. And then we would continue on here naming these things yellow plastic handle so that we know that that's part of that body. This would be circ pattern, flower cut. And then we got this yellow plastic handle main hole. And there we go. We go down here to the name of the part. What's the name of the part going to be? You guessed it, yellow plastic handle. And then we can right click on that part and we can go in here to assign material. And we'll make this out of like an ABS or some kind of plastic. I'll just do ABS for this. And then we can right click on that part again and we can say edit appearance, and we can make this into a yellow appearance here. Here we can go into the mixer, and from the mixer we can make this like a bright yellow, like drag this up into the corner and then drag this slider until it gets to be kind of a bright yellow there. And then we can also in that edit appearance, we can also adjust this slider here for the alpha, which is like the transparency. So we can bring this transparency down a bit, maybe like 75% for the transparency, so it looks like that see-through handle. And that's going to do it for that part. We're going to create 2 more parts here in this part studio, and then that'll be the end of the tutorial. But like I said, if you want to look at all the parts, just search this file. After I'm done shooting the tutorial, I'll model all the rest of the parts so you can look through the entire document. So if you guys are enjoying this tutorial so far, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to let me know if you have any comments or questions down below in the description. And in the next section, we're going to create the metal sleeve that runs up through the middle of this handle. All right, so now that we've got that plastic handle created, now we can create the metal sleeve that goes up through the middle of this plastic handle. Now, this is going to be a relatively simple part compared to that previous part, so this will be a shorter section of the tutorial. All we really need to do is just begin a new sketch here. So you pick this face, S key, begin a sketch. We're going to pick this edge of the model here. We're going to say use, project, convert. Okay, so we're taking this edge here and we're just projecting it. It's a 1-to-1 fit there. And then we're going to create an internal diameter as well. So we'll create this ID here, and the ID for this part, we'll just measure it right off of the part. And the ID for this part is going to be, looks like about 13.4 millimeters. So 13.4, whoops, add in the dimension there, 13.4 millimeters. And now that we've got that shape created, we can S key extrude, and this can also go to that depth of 94 millimeters, just like the hole. So it can go out to that depth of 94. We could also go up to face, and we could pick that bottom face of the hole. That would be another option. So either one of those will work. Again, we're just making this part so that we can design other parts around it, so it doesn't really matter in this case. So that extrude there would be called something like metal sleeve, main shape. And then we're going to go in here to that metal sleeve main shape, pick this face again, S key, begin a sketch, N key to get normal 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to create these little notches here that are in that main sleeve. So those notches are so that this part can fit into this is the central sleeve of the screwdriver. Well, those notches are designed into this part as well. And there's little slots here in this part so that those notches can fit in and can index, so that you're limiting the rotational degree of freedom for the shaft compared to the handle. So we do want to make sure that we model them in there so that the other part fits in there. So we'll just do a center point rectangle, and we'll drop in a rectangle here like so. And it looks like the dimensions for that slot are going to be, looks like about 15.4 wide by about 3.4 millimeters in height. So 3.4 millimeters in height. There we go. And then we'll just take that and we'll extrude that. That's going to be a remove, and it's going to go down to a depth of 10.6 millimeters. That's it. Rename that feature. Come over here, Shift N to rename it. We'll call that, we'll call this metal sleeve. And then we'll call this slot for, I'll just call it slot for index. And now we can come down here to the very bottom. We can call this one metal plastic sleeve, plastic handle sleeve. And then what we can do is we can right mouse button on that part. We can say edit appearance, make it like a silver color here. And then we can right mouse button on that part and we can choose assign material. And we'll just make this out of stainless for now, just so we can get the correct mass. So stainless, just in case we do anything where we're trying to measure the mass of the handle, it'll be good to have these parts kind of close to their correct material. So There we go. That's it for that part in this Onshape Part Studio. You can see that we're still modeling in a Part Studio. We're not in assembly or anything, but what we're doing is we're modeling up that handle. And now we also see in this project that the photo of the handle from the end and the photo of the handle looking down from the top are available. So if you search this project in the public space, you can take a look at these photos as well, and you can use them either to do this project or to do your own project. So now that we've got that information all in there, we are ready to move on to the next step, but we're going to do that in the next video. So don't forget to hit the like button, and in the next video, we're going to model up that rubber handle that goes on the outside of this screwdriver handle. All right, so now we get to the third and final part that we're going to be modeling up in this Part Studio, and this is also going to be the final part that we model up in today's tutorial video. But if you guys have enjoyed this tutorial so far, be sure to hit the like button, and if there's anything else that you want to see specifically, just let us know down below in the comments, and we can make a future video to include that information. And don't forget, you can search the public space for this 2026 Toby screwdriver, and you can take a look at the entire project. So here what we're going to do is we're going to go to a top view, looking down from the top here. We're going to choose the top plane, S key, begin a sketch, and we're going to try to create the geometry for this rubber handle. So where does this geometry begin for the rubber handle? Well, it looks like it begins here kind of surrounding this button, surrounding this plastic part here. And internally, this might not be an exact representation of what's going on, but as long as it's pretty close, we should be in good shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the sketch that I used for the plastic handle main revolve. Here's that sketch. Here it is here. I'll do a Shift N. Whoops, I'll just show that sketch. I'll rename it in a moment. And then what I'll do is I'll grab some of the information from that handle. So for example, I'll grab maybe this point here, which is also in the layout sketch. And then I'll bring that all the way down here to get the kind of start and end for this rubber handle. So just a nice straight line here, straight down to this point. And then I'll come over in this direction for that handle as well. And then I can kind of come up at an angle for this rubber kind of grip shape. And then I can come over in this direction. This is where the max OD is, kind of where that sleeve is. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to model up the there's like a, I don't know how to describe these. They're ridges, I guess you would call them. There's these little ridges that are running around the handle. I think I'm going to model those as extrusions. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this line in like so, and then I'm going to kind of model it to the ID, and I'll determine what that ID is using my caliper to do a physical measurement. So I'll bring that up here perfectly vertical. Hopefully the measurement that I take will have it terminate right about here, and that way I can just go right into that arc. But let's find that out sooner rather than later. Let's create a vertical construction line here, and then let's add a dimension for the diameter to that vertical construction line. And we'll come over here. Whoops, this line here does not look to be vertical. V for vertical. All right, let's try this again. Here we go. Cross over that vertical construction line, and we're going to see that smaller diameter where those ridges are coming up through looks to be about, let's see here if we can get this. Looks to be about 29.5 millimeters. So maybe 29.6 millimeters. So pretty close. Wow, I think we're at 29.8 in the image. So pretty close there. And now all I need to do is just add in a radius there, kind of coming up and over. And I think we could probably even do that with a tangent arc. Let's see what it looks like if we do it with a tangent arc. So a radius coming up and over to here. I think that's a winner. I think that looks pretty darn close. Let's say we take that arc and we make it tangent to this line and see what it looks like. Make that tangent. That is definitely going to work. That's definitely going to be recognizable. I am very happy with how this sketch is coming out here. So you can see here that we don't have to fully define the sketch. We're just using the image here to kind of help us get the geometry into the correct locations. And now we can take that sketch and we can perform a revolve. So we're going to revolve this around this axis here. And this is going to be a new component. We're not adding to the existing plastic handle. We're creating a new component here, a new part. And there we go. There is that rubber grip. So we'll come down here. We'll rename that part in the parts list at the bottom. We'll call that rubber grip. And now let's add in those little side grips that are coming up through from the bottom of the part there. So to create that geometry, I think I'm just going to mainly be working with the actual physical part here and measuring the actual physical part. And it looks like those grips are each about 7 millimeters in width. And so I think I'll just go here to this geometry, this face here, begin a sketch, get normal to. And then what I'll do is I'll create a line here that goes like this. And I'll take that line and I'll say that that line is for construction. And then I'll create a line over here, solid line like so. Make that solid. And I'll create a dimension to that line. We'll make that dimension. Actually, I'll just mirror that line across. Let's just mirror it. Okay, we'll mirror that line across. There we go. And then I'll take this edge right here and I'll do a convert, a use. And I'll take this edge right here and I'll do a convert, a use. And then I'm just going to trim all that geometry up. So I'm going to trim my lines to those arcs and I'm going to trim those arcs to my lines as well. Okay, and now that I've got all that geometry ready to go, let me just hit escape to get out of that trim command. We'll get rid of these extra points that we don't need here. And then we can add in that dimension of 7 millimeters all the way across there. 7 millimeters. Let's go. That looks good. And now we're going to extrude that up. So S key extrude. And we're going to bring that up here almost up to that line. I think I'm going to stop just a little bit short. Just kind of looking at the physical part. Looks like it gets almost up to where that radius goes, but not quite. So I'll just kind of eyeball it up there. And there we go. Hit the green check mark. Yes, that looks good. That looks real good. And then from there, you know, if I wanted to add any other additional touches, maybe I'll call this one here Shift N. I'll call this rubber grip, side grip 1, or extruded grip 1. Maybe we'll call it that, extruded grip 1. And then maybe I could even add in a little fillet there on the top just to make this thing look a little bit smoother there up at the top. So we could do a fillet, add a fillet here on this edge, make that fillet like a radius of 1, just kind of smooth that off a little bit there up at the top. I think that looks really good. And so I would call this rubber grip, extruded grip fillet 1. And now that I've got that geometry in place, now we are ready to turn that into a circular pattern. So again, up here on our pattern command, we choose pattern. This is going to be a feature pattern. And then for our features to pattern, we're going to choose the extruded grip 1, the extruded grip fillet 1. And then for our axis of the pattern, we could just choose the circular edge here. You can see that's what it looks like with 4 instances, but we're trying to do this with 8 instances. And the pattern is showing up in red. But a lot of times when that happens, you can just choose reapply feature, and that will resolve the issue. So that is looking good. Make that pattern there, and wow, I think that's it. I think we're done with that part as well. And so we can rename that one. That one could be Shift N. We'll call that rubber grip, circ pattern, extruded grip. And that's it. Guys, I think that's pretty much it for that entire part studio. So for kind of some final cleanup here, what I would do is I would press the P key to hide my planes. I would hide my layout sketch. I would hide this image of the part. If there's any other sketches here that are shown, I would hide them. So just find the sketch, right click, and you can choose hide, and that'll hide the sketch. We've got to add in our material here for the rubber grip. So assign material, and we can search the library here for rubber. Silicon rubber, that works. Just trying to get the density kind of close. Right click here on the rubber grip and say edit appearance. And we can adjust the appearance here to kind of more of a gray, like what we see on the physical part. And man, that looks good. And then the other thing that I might consider doing here is adding these elements in the tree to a folder. So for example, this is rubber grip, main shape. And here's the sketch for that rubber grip main shape. What you could do is you can pick on this one here, the sketch for the rubber grip main shape. Then you can hold shift and you can pick this bottom item here. And then you can right mouse button and you can say add selection to folder. Add selection to folder. And then you give the folder a name, rubber grip features. And then we can repeat that with the metal sleeve. Pick the first one, hold shift, pick the last one, let go of shift, right click, add selection to folder. Oops, let me try this again. Hit the space bar. Okay, try this again. I think I had the rubber grip features pre-selected. So pick these guys, right mouse button, add selection to folder, call this metal sleeve features. Metal sleeve features. And then we can go here to the background, press the space bar, and we can go starting with this sketch all the way down to this feature. And then right mouse button, and we're going to say add selection to folder, and this will be called yellow plastic features. And that's something kind of nice that you can do when you're trying to clean up that tree, so it's a little easier for you to see. It's a little bit easier for your coworkers to see. And that is where we are going to end the modeling of this part, but we're going to have one final video as a conclusion, so be sure to stick around and let us know if you have any questions or comments down below in the comments. So that's going to do it for today's Onshape step-by-step tutorial. I hope that you learned a lot. We started out by talking about some best practices when you're taking photos, like making sure you're a good distance away so that you don't end up getting perspective distortion, making sure that you're getting nice, crisp, sharp images, making sure you've got good lighting and a good backdrop, and making sure that your camera is nice and plumb and level relative to your object. Then we talked about taking those photos and taking them into some type of a pre-processor before you bring them into Onshape. And what you're trying to do is really two things. You're trying to make sure that you're anchored in the upper left corner, and you're trying to make sure that your photos are perfectly vertical or horizontal, depending on the design requirements of your project. Once we had those photos nice and cropped and pre-processed, we jumped into Onshape, and we showed how in Onshape we're able to start out with a layout to define the size of the image so you get a nice one-to-one. And then we showed how to bring in that image and size that image to the layout so that we were able to use the curvature from that image to help us actually designing our components. And then finally, we were able to use the geometry from that image to define the geometry of our sketches. And you want to remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly on that image. You're mainly using your caliper and your physical parts to get the true dimensions, and you're using the image to help you with some of the trickier features and some of the weird curvature in some of those features. So just keep that in mind and remember that as you're going through and you're designing your parts in Onshape. Hopefully you have enough information now so that you can take your own photographs of your own projects and bring them into Onshape and successfully size them at one-to-one so that you can start tracing some of those images and locating those images. But remember, if you ever want to take a look at this project, you can search the public space for either the 2025 Toby screwdriver or the 2026 Toby screwdriver, and that way you can open up these models, you can open up these documents, and you can even access the photos that we've uploaded with these projects. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, be sure to let me know down below in the comments. Be sure to hit the like button, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next Onshape step-by-step tutorial.